Grand Exemplar, I must warn you that your coming here is extremely ill-advised. I believe my peers and I were quite explicit with our warnings that leaders of the Aod people were not to come to this planet unless absolutely necessary. The Grand Exemplar was clearly annoyed at having to be here. Earth was a promising backwater, with currently 1 billion or so people and with a clear trajectory to grow even further, even if they did not have any great inventions or creations of notes compared to the riches the rest of the galaxy's intelligent life could offer. Your reports have provided little to please the royal family and done much to sow frustration, disappointment, and doubt in your abilities. I'm not here by my own whim, but by the direct order of the kings to judge for myself and report what has made conquering humans so difficult. The other entity made a sign signaling resignation. The two of them were psychically occupying a pair of creatures, a human and a domesticated predator, sitting and eating at an outdoor table in chairs. Around them were the wide rolling hills of the middle of one of the continents, plenty of floral growth and grasses that the Grand Exemplar had been told were inedible to the humans, but something that the creatures they had taken control of were capable of consuming and converting into protein. It was all very physical and inelegant, something that the AO people had long ago abandoned in favor of pure psychic satiation. But the mention of humans controlling others had intrigued the Grand Exemplar, and he wondered if the uselessness of humans may have been slightly premature. There were other species that ate meat, of course, countless of them, but those that still did, while developing such detailed and layered social constructs and civilizations, still relied on hunting, venturing forth into wild areas and preserves in order to obtain the meat they sought. But here the humans had somehow brought the meat to them, the huge, lumbering, and obviously idiotic beasts making lowing calls to each other as they stood eating grass and fattening themselves up for slaughter. Well, your attempt to subjugate humans has been close to 12 millennia in the making out at this point, is it not? Not quite that long, but yes, we've been around since the humans first transitioned into agrarian and static groupings. Initially, we were having difficulty in connecting to them and directing their actions. But then we realized that the humans were actually quite susceptible to suggestion. Oh? Asked the Grand Exemplar. Indeed, said the other Aod. As it turns out, humanity has a weak point in that their mind is very susceptible to theology and superstition. All we had to do was start telling them directly what to do and where to go, and they... Wait, telling them? The Grand Exemplar interrupted. You're telling me that rather than nudge and guide them, you instead spoke directly to them? At first, yes, said the other alien, and before you further dive down my gullets, it was quite successful as well. Humans, when they hear voices, often attributed it to the divine, the command of gods and divinity that ought not be ignored or disregarded. We made significant headway for centuries, tethering ourselves to the ruling classes and in turn using them to cultivate groups of sentient, if impressionable, minions and followers. Slaves in some cases. When we desired, all we had to do was make up some thin excuse to walk amongst the commoners, and we could feed upon human psychic essence at will. Thus far, it sounds like everything was going to plan, said the Grand Exemplar cautiously. Why then the reports of consistent or repeated failures from you and the others? Well, it was also around this time that humanity developed architecture, as many other species have done before, said the Grand Exemplar. Yet this is not more than a footnote for keeping out of the weather and elements. Normally that would be the case, but humans had something else as well. We weren't sure exactly why, but the attrition rate for communications with Ode within the areas of civilization containing structures suddenly became far higher than before. It appeared humanity had either a latent or newly developed ability that we had not previously been aware of, and one that was taking out our people. Or so we thought. What do you mean, or so you thought? Well, we began to find those Aod we thought had been lost, but they were not slain. No, asked the Grand Exemplar in surprise. There were other species that the Aod had taken control of that had autonomous psychic defenses, killing or maiming the parasites sometimes at great cost to the host. But humanity had none of those traits that they carefully screened for when they first began their invasion and insertion into human minds. Well, what was wrong? Nothing structurally, but their minds were fragmented. They were still filled with a great deal of knowledge and could be debriefed at length, having absorbed and observed a high degree of information, But their connection to our purpose, and indeed to their own identities, appeared to be shattered. They were simply staying within the humans, for lack of a better place to go, still being well fed off of their psychic emissions, but also cooperating and aiding the humans. Aiding the humans? The Grand Exemplar snapped in shock. That should be a last resort, if any. Agreed, but you must remember they had forgotten the existence of our species outside of themselves. In such cases, each of these lone Aod had decided that aiding the human they rode upon would help ensure their own survival. And as a result, they helped the host recall information the humans might otherwise forget. The human minds are quite fallible and prone to forgetfulness even at the best of times, and we Aod have far greater capacity for remembering information and patterns than the average human. But aided by the nudging of an Aod, a human could outperform and outcompete their peers and achieve success. The pleasant sensations and neurotransmitters, of which continue to provide additional flavors and profiles of psychic nutrition to the Aod linked with them. The Grand Exemplar understood, but was still frustrated. Their purpose was supposed to be to prepare the humans for mass extraction, and then reduce them to barely conscious, shambling hulks as whole pools of Aod fed all at once on the emissions. But instead, these aberrations in duty and adherence to the mandate of the kings was threatening to derail the entire operation on this planet. Did these agents show any signs of rebellion or traitorous intent? While not impossible, it was fairly rare for Aod to truly be defiant of their kings, and it was the rare but necessary job of the Grand Exemplar to identify and purge such rebellion where it may be found. But the other alien reported in the negative, they're still supportive of the kings, if surprised to find out they existed. We do not believe they seek to foment rebellion, for indeed they cooperate with each other and with non-isolated Aod agents without any sign of subterfuge. Still, the Grand Exemplar said cautiously, I am concerned about this independence, especially if they are linking up with other Aod. It's not direct linkages. Not at first. The learned behaviors to psychically interact with other Aod must be retaught to those who have forgotten. But the Aod have reported that they seem to feel a kinship with those humans who behave as their own human host does, observing everything around them and to an inordinately high degree of recall. What is the mechanism of the human's defenses? Asked the Grand Exemplar. Perhaps it can be overcome or guarded against. That's just it. We're still not exactly sure. The nature of the type of amnesia it induces has a similar amnesiac effect on humans. But while we have determined the trigger, we have not determined the method yet. We only know that it is unpredictable, in which humans may be affected by and how often, rendering long-term habitation within a human hazardous in the extreme, if one wishes to keep in control of all their faculties and memories. The older human, a gray-haired man with a bushy pair of mutton chops, wiped his mouth as the spoon clattered into the empty bowl of soup he'd been enjoying for lunch. The other Aod signals suddenly became anxious. Grand Exemplar, the human is indicating that their meal has concluded. Based on the patterns I've observed, this host has a high likelihood of having an amnesiac episode, such as the one I've warned you about. The Grand Exemplar was still more disbelieving than cautious and privately believed the other Aod was making excuses. Instead of controlling a human, they had inhabited the mind of one of the domesticated predators humans had as companions, an animal referred to by the other alien as a sheepdog. They indicated that while it did not contain a sophisticated enough mind to provide more than the barest of sustenance, it was not permitted to enter human structural dwellings, and so should be immune to the amnesic trigger. Despite their advice, though, the Grand Exemplar had chosen a standard human, savoring the complex flavors of hopes and desires, dreams and fears as it rode behind the creature's eyes. The human had stood stretched and picked up their empty bowl, striding towards the porch in the open doorway to the waiting ranch house kitchen. The other Aod became alarmed. Grand Exemplar, you must abandon that form immediately. The human is moving back to their dwelling, and you are in danger. You have not ridden within that form long enough to control it. The Grand Exemplar's response was patronizing. I do not believe control is needed in this case. I still have not sensed any sort of defenses within this creature, and the more I see of what little progress you made and what forms you yourself have hidden within, the more I am convinced that this is a folly. The kings demand success upon this planet, and after acclimating to this creature's mind, I believe it will prove a worthy vessel to... The response cut out as the human stepped through the doorway and into the kitchen. They paused, head cocked, and the other aide could feel their spirits sink as they recognized the reaction. Out loud and to himself, the human muttered, "Now what the hell was I doing in here again?" Before looking down to the bowl in their hand and muttering, "Oh shit, that's right. I'd forget my own damn fool head if it wasn't screwed on," and striding over to the sink to begin pumping water to rinse off the dish. Cautiously, the other alien guided the sheepdog to stand at the doorway and reached out with their senses to the human's mind. As they did so, the dog of its own accord whined. The human turned, saying with a chuckle, "You know you're not allowed in here, Bentley. Stay on the porch like a good dog." Behind the human's consciousness, the Ayod could sense the presence of another of their kind, who would once have been the Grand Exemplar. Now, though, they could sense a feeling of curious curiosity and apprehension, and consciously reached out to them. "Greetings. I am another Ayod. Do you know who you are?" The other alien responded in surprise. "Oh no, I suppose I don't. I seem to be in the form of an advanced creature, and I feel quite satisfied being here. I do feel like there was something I was supposed to do, but it slipped my mind." Feeling a deep sense of grief and despair wash over them, the other alien began slowly reteaching someone who had minutes before been the right hand of the kings themselves, and now was as ignorant as a larvae.